It was a fog-bound night in Whitechapel when the first screamless horror began to stitch itself into London's memory. In the late summer and autumn of 1888, the East End of London, its alleys stacked with lodging houses, sweatshops, and a steady flow of immigrants and dispossessed, became the theater of a serial killer who would be called, by the press that both fed and inflamed terror, Jack the Ripper. What followed was not only a series of murders, but a national panic, an investigation riddled with mistakes, and a web of conspiracies that would haunt policing and journalism for generations. On August 31, 1888, Mary Ann Nichols was found dead in Bucks Row. Her body, like those that followed, Annie Chapman on September 8th, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes in the night of September 30, the double event, and Mary Jane Kelly on November 9th, was mutilated in ways that suggested knowledge of anatomy and a perpetrator who moved through darkness with cruel precision. The press baptized the killer Jack the Ripper after a taunting "Dear Boss" letter received in late September and later forwarded to police that signed the name. Another letter, delivered to George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee in October and known as the From Hell letter, arrived with a small box and half a human kidney, an organ said to match the missing portion of Catherine Eddowes' anatomy. Investigators from Scotland Yard, led in the field by Inspector Frederick Aberline and overseen by Chief of CID Robert Anderson and Commissioner Sir Charles Warren, faced a hostile landscape, streets by gaslight and fog, frightened witnesses, and a press that printed lurid speculation. The local population's fear fused with xenophobia. A scapegoat emerged in the form of Leather Apron and other immigrant men, and police pressure focused on the Jewish community in Whitechapel. Rumors and anti-Semitic narratives flowed from both penny papers and higher society salons, turning investigation into accusation. The official inquiries were hampered by the limits of Victorian forensics and by procedural failures. Crime scenes were not cordoned, footprints were lost to rain and boots tracked through evidence, potential witnesses were interviewed weeks later, official correspondence leaked, and hoax letters, some likely penned by journalists, cluttered the trail. In 1894, 3 memoranda compiled by senior detectives, including the McNaughton memo, named 3 principal suspects: Montague John Druitt, a barrister who drowned shortly after the last murder, Michael Ostrog, a Russian-born convict with a history of violence, and Aaron Kosminski, a Polish-Jewish barber resident in Whitechapel and later confined to an asylum. Each identification carried caveats. Much was circumstantial, reliant on testimony and on police gossip rather than hard proof. From the beginning, 2 competing narratives vied for acceptance. One framed the killer as a solitary, obscene genius, an inscrutable foreigner or insane loner operating beyond comprehension. The other, darker narrative suggested a conspiracy, that the murderer might be connected to the powerful, and that those powers had the incentive to quash or misdirect inquiries. Rumors of aristocratic involvement implicating names in high society were amplified by fringe investigators and satirical papers. These stories were compelling because they explained the baffling failures. If the police were protecting the privileged, the mistakes began to look like design. Over the decades, suspects multiplied: doctors, soldiers, artists, even members of royalty, and forensic claims resurfaced. A 20th and 21st century rush to apply modern science produced headlines: DNA from stamps and letters, re-examined blood and tissue. Each new claim promised resolution, then collapsed under criticism of contamination, provenance, or sloppy methods. The most enduring fact remained not a solved name, but the lack of closure. 5 official canonical victims, dozens of possible others, and an investigation that ended without indictment. Whitechapel itself changed. The laughter of children and the slam of doors continued. The Ripper's name drifted into myth, but the record speaks plainly. A city unready for that level of atrocity, a police force constrained by politics and primitive technique, a press hungry for sensation, and a public ready to believe conspiracies that made the chaos intelligible. The horror, then, is double: the brutal, intimate violence done to women in the dark, and the second violence of uncertainty, stories proliferating in the vacuum of facts, accusing the innocent, protecting the influential, and leaving a wound in collective history that no forensic test has finally closed. The question that refuses to die is not only who struck those blows, but who profited from the silence that followed. In the fog-bound streets of Whitechapel, the truth remains as elusive as mist. The Ripper's face is still a shadow. The conspiracy is still a set of open doors. We are left with the cold files, the scratched ink of letters, the inquest records, and the testimony of a city that watched